Hello, everyone. I'm Tia of LSAT Unplugged, and today I will be interviewing our special guest, David Weinberg. David Weinberg serves as the Assistant Dean of Admission for Tulane University Law School. He is responsible for the leadership and operation of all admissions functions at Tulane. Among his responsibilities are managing the admissions staff and setting its priorities, designing on and off-campus recruitment programs, overseeing new student orientation programs, and managing the admission and merit-based scholarship decision-making process. So prior to joining Tulane's admissions office in 2013, he was the Assistant Dean for Career Services at Seton Hall University School of Law. So welcome to LSAT Unplugged, Dean Weinberg.
Thanks so much, Tia. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So to start things off, could you give us a little background information as to what led you to admissions?
That's a great question. And I think the simple answer is that I don't think there's any admissions professional I've ever met who knew, like, when I grow up, I want to be the admissions dean of a law school. It's not usually how it works. Actually, though, I had an early introduction to higher education and admissions work during my undergraduate career at Dartmouth. I was actually started like a lot of people. I was a tour guide, and then that led to position in the admissions office. I worked there full-time one summer and then part-time during my senior year. And I really enjoyed the work immensely. I think it's a really special type of work when you get to help shape and craft the community that of learners and scholars and students that ultimately benefit from an institution. And so that was something I was really interested in. And actually, my first job out of college was in higher education. But then I went to law school. And so actually, no offense to any of my colleagues who have master's in higher education degrees, I think there's a lot of different graduate education opportunities out there that provide value. And for me, I felt that a law degree was going to be a great asset, and including practicing law for a little bit of time, as you mentioned. But I think, when you find something you're passionate about, it kind of finds you again. And that's actually what happened. It's kind of full circle. Worked in higher ed, went to law school, practiced law, but now I'm doing admissions work for a law school. And I've been working for two great institutions for quite some time now, and continue to be passionate about the work, find it fun, exciting, and interesting. Obviously, for applicants, I know it's stress-inducing, full of anxiety, but at the same time, that part of the reason I'm happy to be here is I see a big part of the work I do is to kind of help people through that process, as stressful as it may be, and help better understand, how to manage the expectations of being an applicant.
Well, thank you so much for that response. And I'm really glad that you talked about how students might be feeling stress at this time. And they have, as you know, a lot of questions that they hope to gain or get answers to today. And so we're going to dive right in. So how does Tulane Law School regard multiple scores? And the second part of that question, how do you view scores related to the various LSAT formats?
Yeah, and these are great questions because there's been a lot of developments in this space over the last couple of years and even recently, there's been some changes. So simple answer for Tulane, we only look at your highest LSAT score earned, simple as that. And I will say that that was a change in policy that we made from a few years ago. So if you see anything older on the web about Tulane's policies, it's old. Our policy for at least the last several years is just straight, simple. We just look at the highest score. One reason we changed policies is because LSAC offered a new service called Score Preview, where they're going to be candidates who actually were able to take the test for the first time and then see their score and then decide if they wanted it reported officially. And so they were effectively hide it if they weren't happy with their score. And with that in mind, there were already candidates who were going to be hiding their scores. And it just seemed like an equitable policy just to say, it doesn't matter if you use that service. In fact, I kind of think that service is a waste of money, but ultimately we're only going to look at the highest score. Now, the second part of your question is really interesting too, because the format of the LSAT, this whole pandemic reality, we went from in-person testing to, with 4 sections, and then we went to a variety of different online versions to the current version of the LSAT, which is back to having 3 scored sections and an experimental section. And the answer to your question is, it doesn't matter. Whether you took the test in any of those formats, earlier ones, or you're taking the newer ones, we consider the score earned that is reported by the Law School Admission Council to be valid and reliable. And so we'll look at all of those formats. The only caveat, obviously, is that the LSAT is only reportable for 5 admission cycles. So if you took the test more than 5 years ago, LSAC won't report that score regardless of that format. So if that's your case, you might have to retest. But regardless of the format, pre-pandemic, during pandemic, after pandemic, all of them are considered equal.
All right, thank you so much. And so what will it take, or what does it take for students or potential applicants to stand out among other talented candidates for Tulane?
You know, the first thing I'll say when I hear the question about standing out, which I've heard before, is I will say that more candidates stand out for the wrong reasons than the right reasons. Right? I think rule number 1 is don't try too hard to stand out, right? Because then you're getting in of trying to be gimmicky or flashy, and truthfully, the danger with that is we're really looking for a sense of authenticity. I think what really does stand out in our applicant pool is that the candidates who are successful in our applicant pool are really doing their homework. Probably people who are viewing this particular session with us because they're looking for information and insight into the process and the schools to which they're applying. Tulane is an interesting school. Obviously, we're in New Orleans, which itself is a fun city, and a really interesting place to be a student and to be a citizen. I'm a New Yorker. I've now lived here over 9 years, and it's just such a compelling place, both in terms of what it offers as a cultural center, what it offers to law students in terms of an urban center with both really fantastic infrastructure and yet systemic challenges. And so as a law school, what's interesting about Tulane is that the vast majority of our students travel far distances to come to Tulane. Most law students actually at most law schools don't travel as far away from home, but the nearly 75% of our students typically are coming from out of state. So what I think often comes out of that is that the way many of our candidates stand out is I think we tend to attract students who are a little bit more adventurous in terms of both willing to go up, be out of their comfort zone, both geographically, but also perhaps culturally too, moving from the Northeast or the West Coast or the Southeast to a region of the country that may not be the immediate thought of the place where they're going to law school, but they realize it's the right fit for them. And that's something that I'll just end with. I think how you stand out at Tulane, but I think at a lot of law schools, is you really make the case for yourself that this is a good fit for both the law school accepting you, but for you as well. We want students who are ultimately going to be happy to live in New Orleans, to contribute to the community, and to really take advantage of the 3 years that they're in our program.
Thank you so much for that. And now we're kind of going to shift a little bit within this conversation to really talk about aspects of the application that a lot of students have questions about, those being those admissions essays. And we want to know what would be your top tips for writing the various essays, and they can be very broad, encompassing all of them, or specific to this is my tips for the personal statement, diversity statement, addenda.
Well, let me start with the way you frame the question is really helpful, because let me start with something that's really broad, which is to not, I get it. All of those things you mentioned, you have your personal statement, you have your diversity statement, you have your resume. Maybe you have to answer a question about academic challenges or standardized testing challenges you've had. And they all have their place. And you're right, there could be advice for all of those things. But my big global piece of advice, which I give if I have to give one tip, is use all of your real estate. And so let me explain what I mean by that. I don't think applicants understand, I get it, when you're completing your application, you look at piece 1, I'm done with my personal statement, and then I'm done with my resume, and then I'm done with the other thing I have to write. But really, when you're crafting your application, it's really important to think about all of the opportunities you have to convey information about yourself and to write about things that are important to you. So you have your personal statement. One interesting tension that sometimes exists for applicants, as an example, is you have your personal statement and you might have your diversity statement. What if you have themes or stories or topics that actually could fit in both? What if you've written your personal statement and all of a sudden said, I really addressed what I would contribute to the diversity of the law school I'm looking to apply to in my personal statement? What do I do now? Do I repeat it? Do I edit my personal statement? And the answer is probably you don't repeat it, because here's the thing: you have all of this real estate. You have, as much as applicants feel limited by the notion that a personal statement should probably only be 2 to 3 pages, double spaced, use a readable font, and your diversity statement similarly probably shouldn't be more than a few pages, and your resume maybe a page, maybe 2 pages if your significant work experience. The truth of the matter is that you're not limited as much as you think if you look at all of those places as different places to put information. And so for some candidates, the answer is, yeah, if you discovered your personal statement, you already discussed what you contribute to diversity, maybe you go to plan B. Maybe was there another personal statement, story, or topic or experience you'd like to explore? And so different application strategies might ultimately come out of this as you kind of piece together all of the moving parts. Certainly, for example, with your resume, you don't need to regurgitate all of your work experience in your personal statement. So if you find yourself wanting to put those things in and you realize, I'm talking about in my personal statement, you might want to step back from your personal statement and work on your resume, craft your resume in a way that ultimately conveys the information about your professional experience and your volunteer experience. So that big picture point is important, to not feel like you've done one piece, you've done a second piece. If you're struggling with your personal statement, put it aside, work on another piece, and you might ultimately find that as you write your diversity statement or you write your addendum on some topic, it then will help inform what to put or not to put in the other statement that you're struggling with. And the last piece of advice I would give is really read the prompts, read the directions. There are schools that actually have taken some time. Very few applications are going to say personal statement, cut and paste it and put it here. There's probably going to be some nouns and verbs that will help guide you. And as much as I think applicants think, oh, okay, every school just wants a personal statement, reading what those prompts say might actually speak to the culture of the school you're applying to, or the type of information that might be helpful to that school in making a decision. I'll use Tulane as an example. We do use as a prompt an optional prompt for us, and I know applicants call it the why question, the why Tulane question. But I encourage applicants to Tulane to really read our prompt, because what we say in our prompt is you use that prompt in whatever form, way, shape, or form you need to use it. For some applicants, it's an academic program at Tulane that's really a match for them. For others, it's New Orleans. Like if you're born and raised in New Orleans and all you want to write in that is like, look, I'm from here. This is my home and I want to continue to be my home. Being able to share that honesty and authenticity with us is an absolutely acceptable way to use that statement. And we also, for example, in our prompt say, this is not just to tell us why you're interested in Tulane. Use this prompt as an option to tell us what you still don't know about Tulane and you'd like to learn about us, because the tables flip at the end of the process, right? If you're offered admission to a law school, actually at Tulane, our admission staff typically read applications just as much after someone's admitted, because we want to ultimately help them to make connections and to create relationships with current students and faculty. And so using that statement in the way we've suggested you can is helpful to us. We'll reread that and we'll absolutely, as we come to the spring season when people are visiting, take that information to account. So reading the directions, I know it sounds like a basic piece of advice, but there are schools that have taken some time to think about how to ask you for these pieces of writing, and they can be really informative in the strategy you take.
Thank you so much. Read the directions, everyone. So does a well-written admissions essay make up for a lower LSAT score when seeking admissions to Tulane?
I think the answer is that a well-written personal statement is certainly a compelling piece of information. And it is also not something that is is scored. We don't actually score the personal statement in a way that would be directly comparable to a lower LSAT score or a lower GPA. But at the same time, I think that making a compelling case in all of those written pieces absolutely can be a factor as a committee looks at more objective measures of academic merit and standardized test performance. The truth of the matter is that for some candidates, it may not make a difference, but it's hard to come up with a rule, right? I think sometimes this is what you bring up raises the issue of when we talk about what law school admissions is, and at most law schools at Tulane, it is a holistic process. We're looking at all of those moving parts and looking at how they fit into the overall candidacy of the overall strength of the candidacy. And there will absolutely be candidates who have standardized test scores that are lower that will ultimately shine in other areas of the application. But I will say that in instance of standardized test scores being low, a strong personal statement helps, but also taking advantage of those optional questions that might exist. So we do have an optional question about standardized test challenges and performance. In that instance, it's an opportunity to talk, if you're an applicant who has a long history of just standardized tests not ultimately predicting how you've done as a student, either in an undergraduate or graduate program, it would be helpful to take advantage of that question to give context to the admissions committee on that front. So it's kind of a it depends answer to your question, but I will say that absolutely strong writing is something that is important as a law student, and so it can absolutely help make that case.
Thank you. So what are your views on Zoom informational interviews? What are the benefits if applicants seek those calls when they are aiming to apply to law school?
I think they are exceptionally helpful. What I will say is that I'll answer that as far as Tulane is concerned, we have a very vibrant one-on-one schedule. And so any candidate who hasn't yet applied or is waiting for a decision or has been admitted and has additional information, we are very much going to be using the virtual format. We found it really helpful. As I mentioned before, the vast majority of our candidates and our admitted students and our enrolled students are coming from out of state. And so certainly we expect a lot of them to visit in the spring months, but as an applicant, you might not be around the corner from us. So we totally appreciate candidates taking advantage of the opportunity to meet us over Zoom. And what I will say is you said something really important, informational interview. I think that's the way to treat it. We don't offer our Zoom appointments as evaluative interviews, so they're not part of your application process, but absolutely, that's what they're there for. They're meant to be informational. So they're meant to, Zoom conversation as the one we're having now, to get information across to you and can be really helpful to you. So take advantage of schools that offer the Zoom appointments. I know not every law school is as similarly resourced. Especially this year, you're going to find a lot more law schools offering in-person visits or maybe traveling to campuses, and they might be cutting back on Zoom. So, it may not be as even across the board, but I think Zoom is here to stay for this area. And I think applicants have responded really positively. So we are actually going to be doing a lot of on-campus recruiting, but we're going to keep our Zoom schedule. And in addition to our one-on-one appointments at Tulane, candidates should look at the Law School Admission Council website. While they're having in-person forums, they're going to have virtual forums throughout the fall and early winter when it's a particular point in time when virtually all law schools across the United States will be available in Zoom rooms at the same point. So that can be really efficient for candidates to take advantage of as well.
Awesome, thank you. So for Tulane, how early should an applicant consider preparing for the admissions process? What is really early? What is somewhat late from your experience?
Yeah, it's all relative to, early is always relative to late, and late is relative to what's early. But for us, we don't have a specific application deadline. Although your question is a good one. When did you start planning? And I think the truth of the matter is that most candidates really, if you're preparing for the LSAT, you sort of know the time period it takes to prepare for the LSAT, irrespective of how you prepare for the LSAT. And that itself, rule of thumb, I think, is at least 3 months. For some, it's 6 months. For some, it's 9 months. I'll be honest, I think a year of LSAT preparation is a bit of overkill. I think you got life to live, you have things to do, and you probably ultimately have other activities as well as other aspects of your application. But if you kind of build in, I think on average about 6 months plus time to get your personal statement and all of those things, it might be, an overall an 18-month process from when you start all that preparation to when you actually enroll in law school. As far as how early to apply to Tulane, the truth of the matter is your file is not going to be complete until you have a valid LSAT score on file with LSAC. So our application's available as of September 1st. We're already receiving applications. But if you haven't taken the LSAT or you're taking it later in the fall or winter, take your time working on the personal statement and all those other components, and then you can submit it, closer to when you receive your score. What is late for us? Well, we do actually have no deadline. We're sort of an unusual school, and officially we have no deadline. And in theory, if we had space in the class, you could apply as late as July. Having said that, admissions has become exceptionally competitive over the last several years. So the truth of the matter is that candidates who are applying that late are not likely to be offered admission, at least right away. At that point, the most positive outcome might be to be placed on our wait list. We'll have a very qualified wait list throughout the summer months. I generally will encourage applicants, if they're looking to be considered on the merits of their file and be considered for the range of scholarship awards and opportunities, I think it's best to try to have your application in before April 1st, because ultimately by May 1st, we're going to have students submitting their seat deposits, holding space in the class. So if you're applying in April, you might not have a decision until a point when we actually do have limited seats, because the number of spaces will be committed by when we receive those seat deposits. But beyond that, I will say it's very one-on-one decision about when to apply. And this would also be a really great reason for someone to take advantage of a Zoom appointment. If there's, trying to weigh the pros and cons of when to apply and what those other things are, definitely can reach out to an admissions staff member and kind of work out what nuanced answer might be for their specific situation.
Thank you. So what is your process when looking at or evaluating an applicant?
Great question. And I think the way I'm going to answer your question is to say there's no one way. And one of the other things to think about is that different schools may have different readers of your file. And I think that's important. And even within a school, there's no particular one way to read a file. For example, I will be honest and say the very first thing I look at is the LSAT score, but not for the reason people think. It's not because I look at it because I think it's the most important thing in every file. I look at it first because it's the easiest thing to look at. There's really nothing at this point. I've worked in admissions for quite a long time. I understand what the test is measuring, and I understand what the different performance levels ultimately signal within our applicant pool. And so I'm going to look at the score and just get it out of the way, and then I know what it is. Similarly, LSAC, Law School Admission Council, provides a summary of all of the academic transcripts. That's the CAS file, Credential Assembly Service file. And as much as applicants think they're, and obsess with their undergraduate GPA, because, right, it's all about the numbers, right? The truth is that's a starting point, and I actually spend less time looking at the GPA, but more time looking at that summary report, because the summary report, as well as the transcripts, can often tell a story. I'll look at the summary report. For example, if I see someone who's been a really strong student and all of a sudden their junior year, their GPA really tanks, it's going to raise questions for me, right? I'm going to be like, well, I'm hoping as I read the rest of the file that I get an explanation or some understanding of what happened during their junior year. And so looking at all of the scores and the grades and all of those components first is not because I think they are the most important thing. On the other hand, I'll be honest, they are very important, but I look at them because then I can then go into the personal statement, the addendum, all of the other moving parts, and have a sense of the stories I'm looking for the candidate to tell me. Many times candidates want to tell those stories. And I think by preparing myself to find them, it puts me in a position to ultimately do what I think is our role in admissions, which is to ultimately find all of the strengths and look at the weaknesses in context. And so that's really the order for us. But I've had colleagues say, you know what, I read the personal statement first. I feel like I get to know the candidate, and I then have a better sense of who they are, and then I'll look at all of those other pieces, right? And that's why even in the admissions process, collectively, different schools will have different readers, and they might ultimately have a consensus of what's important in terms of who the evaluating who is admitted and who is not. But the actual reading part can be very personal. It's when you're reading hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications on your role in your office and how many applications your school receives, you do have to kind of personalize the process in a way that allows you to consume that information, but to also be fair to candidates and applicants, and know that you, as a reader of their file, are going to be able to give them the benefit of the doubt when it's there, as well as the time necessary to really understand all of the things they're submitting.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your response. And it really sets me up well for my next question, which pertains to non-traditional students and how they are viewed in this process, because some might be nervous, really want to come to Tulane. However, they might just have a different background than the traditional student. And so the question is, how do admissions view non-traditional students?
So the first thing I'll say is, and I'm not going to, this isn't law school, so it's not Socratic method. So I'm not going to ask, what do you mean by a non-traditional student? But in fact, that's actually a big question. What do people mean by non-traditional students? To be completely honest, we don't have a category of non-traditional students in our office, in the sense of we see a candidate and stamp it on their file, or we're paperless, so maybe not stamp it in their file, but type note saying they're non-traditional. This is, in many respects, it's a non-existent category, but I know what you mean. We definitely have candidates who come from backgrounds that are not typical. The average age of a law student in most law schools is early 20s. It speaks to the fact that most candidates graduate from college, probably take a few years off. In fact, the majority of candidates to law school do take some time off, but not all take, most take 2 years to 5 years, not necessarily 6 to 10 or 10 to 20, as we've had candidates who are on their second or third career. But even that, right? There's a candidate out there who thinks, oh, I've been out of school 6 years. That makes me non-traditional, right? And I'm like, well, maybe not, because you're still relatively proximate to when you graduated from college, and maybe you're in your first or second job. And so in a lot of respects, that's pretty traditional. But at the same time, I'm not going to discount the fact that candidate might feel some stress or anxiety coming to law school, because they don't feel like they are in the same position as someone who's just 2 years out of being a senior in college. My advice to candidates is to ultimately recognize a few things. First is, we recognize that things have changed, especially if you've had a career, maybe you've gone to graduate school, maybe you've worked, had significant work experience. So one of the things comes up too is your candidates in this situation are worried about, are we going to discount their academic experience? So it kind of cuts both ways. Are we going to discount their academic experience because it's in the past, and some of them want us to discount their experience because I was a terrible student 10 years ago, and now I have 10 years of work experience. And the truth is that can be helpful, the 10 years of work experience, but given that law school is still an academic endeavor, our process is still such that we're going to be looking at the whole record, including academic information. We value people, the diversity we define very broadly, and we value people with different perspectives and backgrounds. We're known for our strength in, for example, maritime law and admiralty law of ships and boats. And we have had some terrific professionals who come from the cruise ship industry or from the military, who worked in that capacity, and they add such value to the classroom. So the simple answer is yes, we value candidates with that background. and it's really helpful. But the one tip I'll give, and to end my answer, is if you're in this situation and you have a lot of experience, don't assume that that experience translates to the readers of your file. So if you worked in a, for example, if you worked in maybe the tech industry, you have a resume that has a lot of work experience, but you might still want to edit your resume in a way that it conveys the skill sets that you might transfer into a law school or legal setting. We're interested in your writing ability. We're interested in your communication skills and your talents. I'm probably less interested in someone's proficiency in a software tool that I've never heard of before. So it's worth just kind of looking at your resume. This is a good example of an opportunity. Maybe ask a close friend who doesn't work in your industry to look at your materials, not to edit it heavily, it still should be your own work, but to make sure that the perspective that you're conveying is one that someone from any type of background might be able to understand your resume and what you contributed to the organization you worked for, or the endeavors you've been engaged in.
Thank you so much. So what are your thoughts or predictions on the competitiveness of this current or upcoming application cycle?
So I think that question is dangerous because it's asking me to have my crystal ball out and kind of think about things. But let's just start with what we all know and what you've probably heard before and what candidates know, because we see what they have on Reddit and we see what's out there. It's been sort of crazy the last couple of years. The pandemic has had a weird effect. My theory, I'll just say this is less a prediction, but my theory of what we've been seeing is the pandemic has kind of forced two different things to happen. One, there were the people who were in college during the pandemic, and at that point, a lot of the experiences they would have had post-graduation didn't come to fruition. Those job opportunities were kind of sparse. They weren't necessarily wanting to start a job remotely. Maybe they wanted to travel, and we weren't doing that for quite some time, right? So those folks, I think we probably saw candidates speed up their decision to go to law school. But at the same time, if you remember deep in the pandemic, when we were all really stuck at home, reflecting on what we really want to be when we grow up, and kind of getting tired of hobbies and thinking about what our next steps were, there were candidates who decided, it's the time. I've got the time to prepare for the LSAT. It's remote now. I can take it, on my laptop, and I can work on all of those other things because I don't have a commute to work and all of those other stresses. So we did have candidates who really took advantage of that time, and they decided to apply to law school, which resulted in this crazy last 2 years of epic numbers of applications. 2 years, for the fall 2021 class, Tulane's application volume, we were up 45%, which was one of the, lots of law schools were high, but that was on the very high end. That admissions year was just bizarre for us. This past year for fall, the class that just arrived a few weeks ago for fall 2022, our applications were down about 15%, completely fine by us after seeing such an increase the year before. In fact, though, the quality of our application pool as measured by LSAT scores and GPA was still higher. So I think, to answer your question, I wouldn't be surprised if the volume of applications continues to maybe trickle down, but I'm not entirely sure yet that will translate into a lack of quality and competitiveness in the applicant pool. I feel like, especially even this past year, candidates who are applying to law school have really, I think, for lack of a better way of expressing it, really taken this process very maturely and very, there's been a lot of time for self-reflection. And so I feel that a lot of the candidates we're talking with and who are applying are really serious about this and are really, and really can convey in their applications a strong sense of purpose and direction that is really a positive, which will only obviously make it more challenging in, when we have only a certain number of spaces in the class to make those choices. So volume may be down, but I'm not sure yet that will translate into any less of a competitive environment.
Thank you so much. And these next few questions are more so related to the experience at Tulane Law. So how has COVID impacted the law school experience?
Well, it's affected the law school experience. One of the things that has been particularly amazing about working and being working at Tulane and seeing our students at Tulane, we were really lucky to be part of a major research university that had such a vibrant testing and tracing mechanism. Deep during the pandemic, there were times when our students were being tested multiple times a week. We were not a law school that, obviously, like every law school in the country, spring of 2020, we went quickly remote. But by fall of 2021, while we offered flexible options and we absolutely allowed candidates who wanted to be remote to do so for health or safety concerns, the vast majority of our students still chose an on-ground experience. And we've been lucky enough to have the continuity of 2 years of on-ground learning, obviously with safety protocols in place depending on the period of the pandemic. At the same time, I feel like it's are there things that have changed? Yes, I do think something's changed for the better. Like I don't wish that this happened, right? But I was actually having a meeting today with our dean of students, and we were talking about our orientation programs for new students, and we're taking advantage of the fact that we can kind of change up time and space things. We don't have to have it all happen in person during our 1 week orientation. We're able to shorten our orientation in person and then space out certain things that were helpful to new students who are visiting or coming to start. They might be doing certain things on Zoom in July, well in advance. And so some of the aspects of our COVID response have really given us an opportunity to reflect on what we could do better. And we're actually continuing to think about things that worked in that space. Going back to something I said earlier, the vast majority of our students are not from New Orleans. The vast majority of our graduates practice outside of New Orleans too. So one of the advantages I think we always had is that our career development office, for example, has actually always been working with students who need to think about video conferencing and Zoom. And so this was not for us. Zoom was not part of the culture in the way it is now, right? But we're a school that, because our students typically came far distances to study, and that we worked with students who might have had employment aspirations on either coast and understand the importance of technology. And so in that sense, we've been really lucky, I think, as a whole. And we're excited about, whatever, whenever the pandemic is over officially, that will be something that will be really happy. But we feel like we're in a good place, and we've kind of weathered this challenging time in a positive way.
Thank you. We would like to know, what is your favorite thing about Tulane Law?
I mean, it's the city we're in. I can't say anything more than, if you haven't visited New Orleans, what's wrong with you? You need to come visit us. It's a relatively easy flight from most parts of the United States if you're not from here. And it's just such a special and unique place to be. And I think the truth of the matter is that, as much as Tulane itself, as I mentioned, our students travel far distances to come here and then leave and practice around the country and around the world. I think the opportunity to be a part of such an engaging place culturally and otherwise is important. We were the first law school in the country to require pro bono service as a component for graduation. And I think it's special. Every law school does it now, but being a part of a university that has that legacy is something that's really special. And that legacy goes hand in hand with being in the city. It's really an understanding that New Orleans is, we got great music, we got great food, But we also have a lot of systemic challenges, inequities, and Tulane is, as a major force in our community, wants our students to understand and engage these challenges and be part of those solutions. And so to me, that's really special. I moved here to work for Tulane in part because I feel like the ethos of the university as a whole, not just the law school, but our School of Social Work, our School of Public Health, broadly having all of these powerhouse institutions within our university makes for a tremendous experience for our students.
Thank you. So if a student is nervous to reach out to the admissions office, what is your advice if they need additional help or information?
Just do it. It really isn't that hard. I get it. There's some law schools that probably make it easier than others. I hope we make it pretty easy. As I mentioned, students can go right to our web, or applicants can go right to our website and self-schedule time to meet us on Zoom. And that I hope is a signal that we're looking to be as connected as possible on that front. The other thing I'll just give a shout out to is pre-law advising. If you're an applicant who is either currently a student at a college or university or a recent graduate even, many pre-law advisors work closely with their recent alumni. Start with them. Many pre-law advisors can be really helpful on that front to give you general advice, and to also, if you really are feeling nervous talking with a law school and for some reason, they can help perhaps coach what that conversation might be like once you ultimately do it. I will say most pre-law advisors will tell you exactly the same advice, though. Just call us. Most law school admissions officers, we are a very friendly collegial bunch. And we generally are looking to do the same thing, irrespective of what law school we work for, which is to help people through this process that we know can sometimes be daunting.
Thank you so much. And for my final question of today, if students want to reach out to you directly, how can they do so?
Yeah, and so my email address is dweinbe@tulane.edu. And so you're welcome to just email me directly. I do respond to all of my emails, typically within 24 hours, assuming it's a business day. They can also just, as I mentioned, I think the easiest way to reach out to me is via email. You can also just call our office directly. For students who want a Zoom appointments, actually the way we operate is if you want to speak with me directly, I'd say email me first and we can arrange a time. For Zoom appointments, we actually you pick the time, and then our office behind the scenes, we've made sure we have staff available. And so rather than we try to keep equity within my team, we mix up the times and things like that. So you could schedule a Zoom appointment and I might pop up on your screen, but I might not. But all of my assistant directors and my director, we obviously all live here in New Orleans, and so we're happy to answer questions on that front. The two assistant directors in my office actually are both graduates of Tulane Law School, so they have a really interesting perspective as well. And so whether it's me or someone on my team, we're all more happy to have people reach out to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean Weinberg, for taking the time to speak with us today. It was very informative and we truly appreciate your time.